Today, France just became the first country in the world to authorize IV ketamine for severe suicidality. The US has not. Here is what France's regulator saw and what the new evidence says. In March 2026, France's drug regulator became the first in the world to formally authorize IV ketamine for severe suicidal ideation in adults. The mechanism is a structured compassionate use framework, not a full new approval. The US has nothing equivalent. So what does France's regulator see that the FDA does not? That is what this episode is about. The French framework is called a cadre de prescription compassionnelle, a CPC. It is a structured compassionate use pathway, not a full marketing authorization. Ketamine already had an approval in France for anesthesia. The CPC adds a regulated route for the new indication, severe suicidal ideation in adults. The dose is 0.5 milligrams per kilogram, IV, over 40 minutes. A second dose is permitted at 24 to 48 hours if needed. The drug is reserved for hospital use, prescribed only by a psychiatrist, with mandatory monitoring during and after the infusion. France's framework is structured, monitored, and time-limited. The decision runs 3 years and is renewable. The trigger for the French decision, and the reason it now has a global evidence base behind it, is a new JAMA Psychiatry meta-analysis published in May 2026. 26 randomized controlled trials. 1,166 patients with a major depressive episode, including MDD and bipolar depression. 18 trials tested a single infusion. 8 trials tested repeated infusions. About half the patients got ketamine. The other half got a control infusion saline, or midazolam, as an active comparator. Here is what a single IV ketamine infusion does to depression. At 4 hours, the standardized mean difference is -1.74. To put that in perspective, most SSRI trials against placebo produce standardized mean differences around -0.3. This is one of the largest effect sizes ever reported for a depression intervention. The benefit persists. At 24 hours, -1.15. At 3 days, -0.97. At 1 week, -0.89. That is the depression arc after a single infusion. Now the more important arc, suicidal symptoms. The same single infusion. At 24 hours, the standardized mean difference is -0.69. That is clinically meaningful on its own, but the headline is what happens at 1 month. The benefit was still -0.70. The suicidal symptom effect lasted a month after a single infusion. Repeated infusions extended the effect further, with a -0.72 at end of treatment. The largest single trial, ABBA 2022, reported 63% total remission at 72 hours with ketamine IV versus 32% with placebo. That is the magnitude that drove the French decision. One methodologic note worth pausing on. The control arm in many of these trials was not just saline. It was midazolam, a benzodiazepine that partially mimics the subjective experience of a ketamine infusion without having the antidepressant effect. That matters. It means the comparison is not just drug versus no drug. It is drug versus an active drug that mimics the infusion experience. The signal that comes out the other side is specifically a ketamine signal, not just an I got an infusion signal. A quick note on esketamine. IV racemic ketamine is not the same as intranasal esketamine, which is the form approved in the US as Spravato. The Lancet commentary on the French decision notes that the literature has not confirmed a significant effect of intranasal esketamine on suicidal ideation. Generic racemic ketamine is also substantially less expensive. For the full IV racemic versus intranasal esketamine comparison, see episode 014, Is IV ketamine actually better than Spravato? Now, where does the US sit? IV racemic ketamine has no FDA psychiatric indication. It is off-label here. The only ketamine family product approved for a psychiatric indication in the US is intranasal esketamine. The French framework is a structured, monitored, time-limited authorization with mandatory re-evaluation. The US has none of that for IV racemic ketamine. The Lancet commentary calls the France decision a major step forward. It also notes that ketamine is not a panacea. The benefit is time-limited. 10% of patients get no benefit at all. 50% show a fluctuating response over 6 weeks. The reduction in suicide attempts or overall mortality has not been demonstrated. This is a tool inside a multimodal care plan. It is not a replacement for one. The takeaway is not that France is right and the US is wrong. The takeaway is that the evidence base for IV ketamine in severe suicidal ideation is now the largest pooled RCT sample in psychiatry for this indication. 26 trials, 1,166 patients, midazolam controlled, a 4-hour effect size that is rare in this field, and a 1-month persistence of the suicidal symptom effect that is rarer still. France built a framework around that. The US has not. The clinical question for you the next time you see a patient in severe suicidal crisis is which framework is the better match for the evidence. For questions or episode ideas, drop them below and subscribe for more psychopharmacology breakdowns. Educational purposes only, not a substitute for clinical judgment.